The president decided to follow a judge home after court one afternoon, thinking something was wrong. But what he discovered in a hidden meeting would reveal corruption so deep that it would shake the entire justice system of Burkina Faso. Before we start, what time is it where you are right now? Which country are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let me know. And please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community fighting for truth and justice. President Ibrahim Traoré stood in the back of the courtroom in Ouagadougou. He wore simple clothes, not his usual uniform. A plain shirt and trousers. A cap pulled low over his face. Nobody recognized him. That was exactly what he wanted. He had come to watch a trial. Not an important political case. Just a simple land dispute between a farming village and a wealthy businessman. The kind of case that most leaders would never pay attention to. But the president had received 3 letters in the past month. All from the same village. All saying the same thing. The judge was corrupt. The judge was taking bribes. The judge was ruling against poor farmers, even when the law was clearly on their side. The first letter he had read and set aside. Many people write complaints. Sometimes they are true. Sometimes people are just angry about losing. The second letter came with more details. Names, dates, and descriptions of meetings between the judge and the businessman's lawyers. The president had paid more attention. The third letter came from a grandmother. She was 73 years old. She wrote that her family had farmed the same land for 5 generations. Now they were being forced off. She wrote that if the courts could not protect ordinary people, then what was the point of having courts at all? That letter touched something deep in the president's heart. He had not fought for his country's freedom just to see rich men buy justice. He had not risked his life just to see poor families crushed by corruption. So he checked the court schedule. He found out when the next hearing would be, and he came to see for himself. The courtroom was not fancy. Paint peeled from the walls. Fans turned slowly overhead, barely moving the hot air. About 30 people sat on wooden benches. Most were from the village. Farmers wearing their best clothes, women with babies on their backs, and old men with weathered faces. On the other side sat the businessman and his 3 lawyers. They wore expensive suits. They carried leather briefcases. They spoke quietly to each other and sometimes laughed. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Judge Ouedraogo was a tall man in his 50s. He wore the black robes of his office. He had a serious face and gray hair. He looked exactly like what a judge should look like. Dignified, respectable, trustworthy. But President Traoré watched the judge's eyes. He watched how the judge looked at the farmers with barely hidden impatience. He watched how the judge nodded slightly to the businessman's lawyers as if greeting old friends. The hearing began. A lawyer for the village stood up. His suit was old and did not fit well. He presented documents showing the village had farmed this land since 1923. He showed records from the colonial period. He showed papers from after independence. He showed tax payments going back decades. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "the evidence is clear. This land belongs to the community. It has always belonged to the community. The law protects community farming rights." The judge looked bored. He glanced at the papers without really reading them. Then the businessman's lawyer stood. His suit probably cost more than the village lawyer earned in 6 months. He spoke smoothly, using complicated legal language. "Your Honor, while the plaintiffs present old documents, they fail to understand modern property law. My client purchased development rights through proper legal channels. He has investment plans that will bring jobs and progress to the region. We cannot allow outdated claims to block economic development." President Traoré felt his jaw tighten. Development rights? The village lawyer had not even mentioned anything about development rights. This was new information, probably brought up to confuse the issue. The village lawyer stood again. Your Honor, we were never informed of any development rights sale. The community was never consulted. That is enough. Judge Uedrago interrupted. I have heard sufficient arguments. I will review the materials and issue a ruling next week. But Your Honor, the village lawyer protested. We still have witnesses to present. I said that is enough, the judge repeated, his voice cold. The hearing is concluded. Next case. The farmers looked at each other in confusion and worry. They had been promised a full hearing. They had brought people to testify. Now they were being dismissed, after barely 20 minutes. President Traoré watched it all. He watched the judge gather his papers. He watched the businessman shake hands with his lawyers, smiling confidently. He watched the farmers file out slowly, their shoulders slumped in disappointment. The grandmother who had written the letter sat in the front row. She was crying quietly. A younger woman, probably her daughter, held her hand. The president felt anger burning in his chest. But he kept his face calm. He kept his cap low. He followed the crowd out of the courtroom. He waited outside in the courthouse garden. He sat on a bench under a tree, pretending to read a newspaper. But his eyes watched the door. Judge Uedraogo came out an hour later. He had changed from his robes into a nice suit. He walked to the parking area and got into a black Mercedes, an expensive car for a judge's salary. President Traoré walked quickly to his own vehicle. He had driven himself today. No security team, no presidential convoy, just a plain Toyota that could be anyone's car. He followed the Mercedes from a distance. The judge drove through Ouagadougou's afternoon traffic. He stopped once at a bank. He went inside for 10 minutes, then came out carrying a briefcase. The same briefcase he had taken into court empty that morning. The president's instincts sharpened. A briefcase that goes into a bank empty and comes out full. That was very interesting. The judge continued driving. He left the main roads. He drove toward the wealthier part of the city, where big houses sat behind high walls, where government ministers and successful businessmen lived. The Mercedes turned into the driveway of a large house. The gate opened automatically. The judge drove through. President Traoré drove past without slowing. He noted the address. He circled the block and parked on a side street where he could see the house's back wall. He waited. Patience was something he had learned long ago. In military operations, patience often meant the difference between success and failure, between life and death. 20 minutes later, another car arrived. A Range Rover, even more expensive than the judge's Mercedes. It pulled up to the same gate. The gate opened. The Range Rover went inside. The president took out his phone. He took photos of the vehicle and license plate. Then he made a quiet call to his chief of intelligence. I need you to check a license plate for me, he said. Quietly. Tell no one else. He read out the number. His intelligence chief asked no questions. He simply said he would call back within the hour. President Traoré waited. The sun moved lower in the sky. The afternoon heat began to ease slightly. People walked past on the street. Normal people going about normal lives. None of them knew their president sat in a Toyota watching a house where corruption was probably happening right now. His phone rang. The intelligence chief's voice was careful. Sir, that vehicle is registered to Amadou Zerbo. The president knew that name. Everyone in Burkina Faso knew that name. Amadou Zerbo was one of the richest men in the country. He owned construction companies. He owned import businesses. He had investments in mining. And he was always involved in land deals. Big land deals, where small communities somehow lost their land, and Zerbo's companies somehow gained it. Is this the same Zerbo involved in that village land case? The president asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes, sir. The case being heard by Judge Uedraogo. The president thanked him and hung up. So the judge was meeting with the businessman whose case he was supposed to decide. And the judge had visited a bank first, carrying a briefcase. This was not suspicious. This was obvious. The only question was whether he could prove it. The president settled in to watch. The sun set. Street lights came on. Mosquitoes began to bite. He ignored them. He had spent nights in the bush during the revolution. He had waited in far more uncomfortable positions. An hour passed. Then another. Lights were on in the house. He could see figures moving past windows but could not make out details. Finally, near 9 p.m., the gate opened. The judge's Mercedes came out. The judge was alone. He drove away looking relaxed, almost happy. The president faced a choice: follow the judge home or wait to see if anything else happened here. He decided to wait. The judge was not going anywhere. He could investigate him tomorrow. But this house might reveal other secrets tonight. His patience was rewarded. 30 minutes later, another vehicle arrived. A government car with official plates. A man in a suit got out. In the streetlight, President Traoré recognized him. Traoré, a director at the Ministry of Land Affairs, a man responsible for approving land transfers and development permits. The president took more photos. He documented the time. He sent another message to his intelligence chief. Check if there are any land permits pending approval for Zerbo's companies. The answer came back quickly. 3 major permits, all pending final signature from Director Traoré. The pieces were falling into place. A businessman who wanted land. A judge who ruled on land disputes. A government official who approved land permits. All meeting together secretly. This was not just one corrupt judge. This was a network. A system. And how many villages had lost their land to this system? How many families had been pushed off farms their ancestors had worked for generations? President Traoré felt the weight of it. This was not just about one case. This was about the whole foundation of justice in his country. If courts could be bought, if judges served the rich instead of the law, then everything he had fought for meant nothing. He took more photos. He documented everything. He noted every vehicle that came and went. Finally, near midnight, the meetings seemed to end. The government official left. Then Judge Ouedraogo left. Then, finally, Zerbo himself came out. He stood by his gate smoking a cigarette, looking pleased with himself. A man who thought he was untouchable. A man who thought his money and connections put him above the law. President Traoré started his engine. He drove home slowly, his mind working through what he had seen. He thought about that grandmother crying in the courtroom. He thought about the farmers who had brought their documents and witnesses, believing that truth and law still mattered. When he reached his residence, his security team was surprised to see him driving himself. They started to ask questions, but he waved them off. "I am fine. I just needed to drive alone tonight." He went to his private office. He did not sleep. He sat at his desk and began making phone calls. Secure calls, encrypted lines. To people he trusted completely. People who had fought beside him. People who valued justice more than money. He told them what he had seen. He sent them the photos. He explained his suspicions. Each person reacted with the same anger and determination. This corruption had to end. Not just punish one judge. End the whole system of buying justice. But they needed proof. Real proof. Photos of cars at a house were not enough. They needed evidence of money changing hands. They needed recorded conversations. They needed documents. The president made a decision: he would not just follow the judge. He would investigate all of them. Zerbo, the judge, the government official, and anyone else involved. He would build a case so strong that no lawyer could defend them. But he had to be careful. These were powerful men. They had friends in government. If he moved too quickly, they would destroy evidence. They would flee. No, he needed to be patient. He needed to be smart. The next morning, President Traoré attended his usual government meetings. He sat through budget discussions. He reviewed security reports. To everyone around him, it was a normal day. But his mind was working on the corruption case every single moment. During a break, he pulled aside Colonel Ouedraogo, his most trusted military intelligence officer. They had fought together during the revolution. The colonel had taken a bullet meant for Traoré. "Colonel, I need you for something sensitive," the president said quietly. "Very sensitive. Tell no one." The colonel nodded. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" They walked to a secure room where no one could listen. The president told him everything. The court hearing, the meeting at the house, the government official, and the businessman Zerbo. The colonel's face grew dark with anger. These men are stealing from villagers? Buying judges? That is what I believe. But I need proof, real evidence that will stand up in court. The president laid out his plan. I want surveillance on 3 men. Judge Udraogo, businessman Zerbo, and Director Traoré from Land Affairs. I want their phones monitored. I want to know where they go, who they meet, and what they say. But this must be completely secret. Use only people you trust with your life. The colonel thought for a moment. I have 2 men, former intelligence operatives. They worked with me during the revolution. They are loyal and they hate corruption. Good. Start today. And Colonel, I want to know how many land cases Judge Udrago has decided in the past 3 years. And I want to know how many involved Zerbo or his companies. You think this is not the first time? I think this has been happening for years. I think we are seeing just one piece of something much bigger. The colonel saluted. I will have answers for you within days. True to his word, Colonel Sawadogo worked fast. 3 days later, he returned to the president's private office with a folder full of reports. Sir, you were right. This is much bigger than one case. He laid out documents on the desk. In the past 3 years, Judge Udrago has ruled on 23 land dispute cases. In 19 of those cases, he ruled in favor of businesses against villages or small farmers. And in 14 of those 19 cases, the businesses were owned by or connected to Amadou Zerbo. President Traoré felt sick to his stomach. 14 cases. How many families lost their land? Our research shows approximately 300 families were displaced from land their families had farmed for generations. 300 families. Fathers, mothers, children, and grandparents forced off their land. Crops abandoned, homes left behind, lives destroyed. All so one rich man could get richer. Where did these families go, the president asked. Most moved to the cities. Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso. They live in poor neighborhoods now. No land, no farming. The men try to find day labor. The women sell things in markets. The children, many are not in school anymore. The president stood and walked to his window. He looked out over Ouagadougou. Somewhere in this city were 300 families who had lost everything because the justice system failed them. What about the surveillance, he asked. Colonel Sawadogo pulled out another folder. We have been monitoring all 3 targets. Judge Udrago receives regular deposits to a bank account in Togo. Small amounts, never enough to trigger automatic investigation. But over 3 years, nearly 200 million CFA francs. That was almost 350,000 US dollars. A fortune for a judge, whose official salary was maybe 1/10 of that. Director Traoré has a similar account in Côte d'Ivoire. And we have recorded several phone conversations between the judge and Zerbo. They speak carefully, but the meaning is clear. The colonel played a recording. The president heard Judge Udrago's voice. The matter we discussed is proceeding as expected. There should be no obstacles. Then Zerbo's voice, smooth and confident. Excellent. My people will show their appreciation in the usual manner. That is understood. The arrangement has always been satisfactory. It was not a direct confession, but together with the bank records and the pattern of rulings, it painted a clear picture. There is more, the colonel said. We followed Zerbo to a meeting yesterday. He met with 5 other judges, not together, but one by one throughout the day. All handle land cases or commercial disputes. The president felt the full weight of it now. This was not 3 corrupt men. This was a whole corrupt system. Multiple judges on Zerbo's payroll. How deep does this go? He asked. We are still investigating. But sir, some of the people involved have powerful connections, friends in the government. When you move against them, there will be consequences. President Traoré turned from the window. Colonel, did we worry about consequences when we fought for this country's freedom? No, sir. Then we will not worry now. These men are stealing from the poor. They are destroying families. I do not care who their friends are. But I want to visit some of these families who lost their land. I want to hear their stories directly. That could be dangerous, sir. If word gets out, then we make sure word does not get out. Arrange it quietly. No presidential convoy. Just me and you. 2 days later, President Traoré and Colonel Sawadogo drove to a poor neighborhood on the edge of Ouagadougou. They wore civilian clothes. They drove an unmarked car. The colonel had made contact with a family named Ilbudo. They had lost their farm in a land case decided by Judge Ouedraogo 2 years ago. The Ilbudo family lived in a small compound with 3 rooms. The walls were thin metal sheets. 8 people lived there: grandparents, parents, and 4 children. When President Traoré and the colonel arrived, the family was nervous. They did not recognize the president at first. He dressed simply and spoke gently. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," he said. "We are investigating land cases. We heard what happened to your family. Can you tell us about it?" The father, François Ilbudo, was a man in his 40s. His hands were calloused from years of farm work. But now he worked as a day laborer, carrying loads at the market. "We had 15 hectares, François said. "My grandfather cleared that land. My father farmed it. I farmed it. We grew millet, sorghum, and vegetables. We were not rich, but we had enough. We had our dignity." His wife, Mariama, continued the story. "Then one day, men came with papers. They said a company had bought development rights. They said we had to leave. We went to court," François said. "We had documents showing the land was ours." Community elders testified. "Everyone in our village knew that land belonged to my family." "What happened in court?" the president asked. "The judge barely looked at our evidence. He listened to the company's lawyers. They talked about development and economic growth." François' voice broke with emotion. "That was our home. My father is buried on that land. My children were born there." Mariama wiped tears from her eyes. "The judge ruled against us. He gave us 2 weeks to leave." "Did you try to appeal?" "We had no money for appeals. We had already borrowed money to pay our lawyer. We had nothing left." The grandmother, who had been sitting quietly, spoke up. Her voice was strong despite her age. "That judge is a wicked man. He sits in his fancy car and his nice house. He does not care that we sleep on the floor now. He does not care that my great-grandchildren go to bed hungry sometimes. He sold his soul for money." President Traoré felt anger burning inside him. But he kept his voice gentle. "What happened to your land after you left?" "Nothing," François said bitterly. "That is the worst part. They said they needed it for development. But 2 years later, it just sits empty. No development, no jobs. They just wanted to take it from us." The president glanced at Colonel Sawadogo. This was part of Zerbo's pattern. Take land from villages using corrupt judges, then hold the land until its value increased, then sell it for huge profit. "What would you do if you could get your land back?" the president asked. François looked at him with tired eyes. "That is a dream that will never happen. Men like us do not win against men like them." "What if I told you that things might change? That someone is working to expose these corrupt judges?" The grandmother leaned forward. "Who would do that? Everyone knows the judges are corrupt. But nobody does anything. The government does not care about people like us." President Traoré looked at her directly. "What if the government does care? What if someone at the highest level is paying attention?" Something in his voice made the family look at him more carefully. The colonel pulled out his phone and showed them a photo. An official photo of President Traoré in uniform. "Do you recognize this man?" the colonel asked. They looked at the photo, then at the president sitting in their humble home. François' eyes went wide. "That is President Traoré. And who do you think is sitting in front of you right now?" the colonel asked gently. Mariama gasped. She started to stand, but the president raised his hand. "Please, sit. I did not come here for formality. I came to listen. I came to learn the truth." The grandmother was crying now. "You came to our home? I came because what happened to your family is wrong. I came because I want to fix it. But I need your help. I need you to be willing to testify. When we take these corrupt men to court, I need families like yours to tell your stories. Will you do that? Yes, Francois said without hesitation. Yes, we will tell everyone what they did to us. The president visited 4 more families that day. Each story was the same. By the end of the day, he had a clear picture of the suffering these corrupt men had caused. That evening, he called a meeting of his inner circle. Only 5 people. Colonel Sawadogo, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, the head of the Anti-Corruption Agency, and the Minister of Justice. He laid out everything: the surveillance evidence, the bank records, the phone recordings, and the testimony from families. The Chief Justice was horrified. "This is a stain on all of us. It is not your fault," the president said. "But it is our responsibility to fix it." The Attorney General studied the evidence. "This is strong. We can build criminal cases against all of them." Colonel Sawadogo answered, "We have identified 6 judges, 12 government officials, and at least 4 major businessmen, including Zerbo." The Chief Justice spoke carefully. "When you arrest a judge, people will accuse you of political interference." "Let them," the president said firmly. "A corrupt judge is not independent. He is a criminal in robes." "We must do this by the law," the Attorney General said. "Everything legal and proper." "That is why you are here," the president said. "Build cases that cannot be challenged. When we move, I want it to be final." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation intensified. Surveillance teams watched every target. Forensic accountants traced money. The evidence grew stronger. Bank records showing millions in bribes. Recorded conversations. Testimony from dozens of families. They also discovered the corruption network had connections to illegal gold mining on stolen land. One evening, Colonel Sawadogo came with urgent news. "Sir, one of our surveillance teams was spotted. Zerbo has increased his security. He might be preparing to destroy evidence." The president made a decision. "Then we move now. Tomorrow. Can we be ready?" "Yes, we can be ready." "Call everyone. The operation happens at dawn." Dawn broke over Ouagadougou. Across Burkina Faso, 200 soldiers and police moved into position. President Traoré stood in the operations center. Team 1 in position at Judge Ouedraogo's residence. Team 2 ready at Zerbo's compound. Team 3 at Director Kabore's home. 15 locations total. The president picked up the radio. "This is Traoré. The men we are arresting today betrayed our people. They sold justice. They destroyed families for profit. Today we show them that no one is above the law. Go." At Judge Ouedraogo's house, officers knocked hard on the gate. "Open this gate. We have an arrest warrant for Judge Ouedraogo." The gate swung open. Officers found the judge in his bedroom. "What is this?" the judge shouted. "You are under arrest for corruption, fraud, and abuse of office." The judge's face went pale. "This is a mistake." The warrant was signed by the Chief Justice. "Get dressed." At Zerbo's compound, the businessman tried to run to his garage, where he kept cash and false passports. But officers were waiting. "Going somewhere, Mr. Zerbo?" He froze. For the first time, money could not save him. Director Kabore was arrested, burning documents. Officers put out the flames and saved evidence. By 7 a.m., everyone was in custody. By afternoon, the whole country knew. President Traoré held a press conference. "Today, we arrested 22 people on charges of corruption. Among them are 6 judges, 12 officials, and 4 businessmen. These people betrayed our nation. They turned our courts into markets where justice was bought and sold. For too long, people believed the rich could act without consequences. Today, we prove that wrong. In Burkina Faso, no one is above justice." A journalist asked about judicial independence. "A corrupt judge has no independence. By arresting corrupt judges, we are protecting judicial independence." Another asked about families who lost land. "Every case will be reviewed. Where we find corruption, rulings will be overturned." Families will get their land back. That is a promise. That evening, President Traoré returned to the Ilbudo family. Judge Odrago was arrested this morning. He will stand trial, and your case will be reviewed. You will get your land back. Mariama began to cry. Tears of relief. The grandmother took the president's hands. I said the government did not care. I was wrong. Forgive me. There is nothing to forgive. As long as I am president, your voices will be heard. The trials began. The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Odrago was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years. Zerbo received 25 years for fraud, corruption, and illegal mining. The other officials received sentences from 10 to 18 years. All 22 were convicted. But the president knew punishment was not enough. He launched reforms. All land cases would be reviewed by panels of 3 judges. All decisions would be published publicly. He created an independent anti-corruption court. He increased salaries for judges. He established legal aid for poor families. He created a land rights registry. 3 months later, the Ilbudo family returned to their land. When Francois stepped onto his 15 hectares, he fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. I never thought I would touch this earth again. His children ran across the fields, laughing. The grandmother walked to a tree. My husband is buried here. For 2 years, I could not visit. Now I am home. Over the next year, 127 families got their land back. One evening, President Traoré sat in his office. On his desk was a folder with letters from families. He also kept a photograph of him hugging the grandmother. Her face showed peace. Colonel Sawadogo entered. Sir, the final report is ready. We prosecuted 34 people total, all convicted. We recovered 2.3 billion CFA francs. 127 families got their land back. Corruption in land cases has dropped by 60%. And the illegal mining shut down completely. President Traoré looked out over Ouagadougou. Colonel, when I followed that judge, I just knew something was wrong. I trusted my instincts. Your instincts saved a lot of families, sir. No, the law saved them. Justice saved them. I just made sure the law was enforced. That is what leadership is. The president turned from the window. The work is not finished. We must keep fighting. Then we keep fighting. President Traoré sat back at his desk. He had followed a corrupt judge and exposed a network of criminals. He had broken a system that oppressed poor families. He had shown that courage can defeat corruption. And most importantly, he had kept his promise to a grandmother who thought no one cared. Because sometimes the powerful hide behind robes and titles and wealth. They think they are untouchable. But if you stay alert, if you trust your instincts, if you act with courage, you can expose them, you can bring them to justice. You can change everything. And that is exactly what President Ibrahim Traoré did. So if you found this story inspiring, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories of courage and justice. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think your country needs leaders like this? What would you do if you discovered corruption in your community? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Let's spread the word that justice is possible when good people refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.